Welcome to episode 142 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. This week, I want to touch on the subject of accountability. This practice is coming into play in a number of news items in the last week. Accountability is a profoundly important spiritual principle. You will always be held accountable for the choices you make, whether in this realm or the next. No one gets away with anything. But there is a big difference between being held accountable here in this school and leaving here without making things right because you resisted the growth opportunity you were given. I'm going to start with a light example first, and then we can get deeper. In the last week, there was the story of peaceful protesters outside a restaurant making Judge Kavanaugh feel he needed to slip out the back door so as not to be faced with their existence. No one was menacing him in any way. They were just letting their feelings be known, which he chose, as he can, to avoid. Some people were very upset that he was inconvenienced in this way. But if we are to learn anything, it is that the calls for politeness are simply calls for us to shut up and accept whatever is dished out by those who have the power. Politeness does not serve us. It only serves those who are imposing their will. We won't go home and quietly grieve the loss of our bodily autonomy, especially if the only reason to do so is to increase the comfort of a man who lied under oath about the legal protection we once had. That's not okay. And if they want to remind him that it's not okay until the end of time, I'm okay with that. Choices have consequences. The consequence of stripping the rights of over half of the population may be that you have to be reminded that what you did was deeply dangerous and hurtful to the people it affects. Not everyone has a conscience yet. Not everyone has the ability to understand that their choices can cause horrendous consequences for others. They don't know this yet, and frankly, they don't care. They are not yet at a level of spiritual awareness that the well-being of others factors into their decisions. They can justify their choices by using thinking that skims the surface of the human experience. They aren't yet capable of deeper thinking or deeper caring. As you grow to higher levels of spiritual awareness, you naturally take into account many deeper levels of any given issue, which makes every decision decidedly more difficult. But those decisions tend to do less damage than the decisions that only skim the surface, as did the decision of stripping women of our bodily autonomy. So what happens when someone is incapable or unwilling to care that the choices they make result in deep harm, when they don't have a conscience yet that includes that complexity? That is where everyone else comes in. When people lack an internal conscience, we need to act as their external conscience. We need to remind them that they are doing harm. In this country, we have, at least for now, the right to peacefully protest. It is one of the important ways that we can express our opinions about how this country should operate. The same people who are furious that there were protesters outside a restaurant have always protected the rights of the protesters outside of every Planned Parenthood, which has been done as far back as I can remember. And those protests have not always been polite or civil. I was once stuck at a traffic light in a minivan full of little kids in car seats where a group of forced birth enthusiasts had taken to the streets. A man peeled off from their crowd and pressed a sign with bloody images against the car window where my toddler was sitting. It was threatening and terrifying to children who were too young to understand why this was happening. Look, we're all stuck here in this school where we have wildly different ideas of how the world should work. We are all forced to hear things that offend us. We are all forced to see things that we would rather not see. That is the nature of this school. None of us are allowed to live in a bubble of our own comfortable thoughts, nor should we be, especially if we have power over others. I've been watching the January 6th hearings, and they are fascinating, not only on a historical level. They are interesting on a spiritual level. We know that being at the higher levels of spiritual awareness means that you have incorporated honesty, integrity, empathy, and humility into your very being. Those attributes become your internal operating system. And we know that when you are at the lower levels of spiritual awareness, you not only lack those attributes, you also feel entitled. You dodge accountability at every turn. Your thinking is based on any means to an end, and you are motivated primarily by your need to gather money, power, and status. You can watch the events of January 6th unfold with all the players who were a part of it, and it is pretty easy to discern the spiritual awareness grade levels of all the participants. We have the former president, who is at the spiritual awareness grade level of a preschooler. It is fascinating to see that level of awareness as it plays out. The man is so crippled by the curses that come with being at the lower levels of awareness that he is unable to face reality, let alone accept it with any amount of grace or dignity. He still can't accept reality. He feels entitled to hang on to the money, power, and status that he was granted, and will do anything and use anyone to maintain his hold over such things. There were literally no options for him that were not on the table. This remains the case. It's wild to watch someone who is so desperate that they will reject not only the truth, but will also reject the truth as told to them by those that they have chosen to surround themselves with in a professional capacity. Once they won't join his delusion, he had to go outside to find any lunatic who would tell him what he wanted to hear. And there will always be some lunatics who are up for just this sort of thing. Being a person at the lowest levels of spiritual awareness, he was never going to surround himself with people who were at the highest levels of awareness, because the attributes that come along with that are not only not valued by the man at the lowest levels, those attributes are seen as weak and stupid. He is at such a low level that he has no interest yet in increasing his own honesty, integrity, empathy, or humility. Those attributes are for suckers, as far as he can tell from where he sits. But you can't really blame him for thinking that. He put his complete lack of honesty, integrity, empathy, and humility on full display, and there were still enough people who also inhabit the low levels, who thought, and still think, he must be their king. There were enough people who also do not value any of those attributes. so many people that he was elected to be President of the United States. Think about that. So as the January 6th run-up begins, you can start sorting the cast of characters into those who were at his same level of spiritual awareness, and you can see, through demonstrated resistance, those who were at slightly higher levels of awareness. It is clear that no one who had proximity was at a high level of spiritual awareness, because none of them sounded the alarm when this was actually happening. Some of them have just enough honesty and integrity to tell the story now, when they are basically forced to do so. There is an argument about whether or not these people, the ones who are speaking up now, are heroes. Some say yes, some say no. But in reality, they may be stretching to a higher level of spiritual awareness than they possessed when they first became involved with that administration. So, in an absolute sense, they are not yet at high levels, but they probably had to grow some to even tell their part of the story. And that is how this whole spiritual progression process works. We all start at one level and struggle to get to a higher level. It's fair to celebrate all growth that people achieve, even if it is at a much lower level than we might hope for or need. The importance of accountability as it relates to the coup attempt is no different than the accountability that is required for any relationship to flourish or any business to succeed. It's just at an elevated level. This accountability is directly tied to whether or not we will be able to live in a functioning democracy. If there is no accountability, if there are no consequences, then everyone will have learned the lesson that you can use the attributes of the low levels of spiritual awareness, the practice of any means to an end to amass all the money, power, and status. You can use that to lift yourself to a societal level where you no longer have to face any consequences. Imagine the dark, dark souls who will be drawn to these positions of power once that lesson is fully absorbed. Our reaction now will fully dictate the quality of leaders we have in the future. This may all seem political, but if you look closer, you will see that this is all spiritual. We tend to think of all things spiritual as being separate from real life, but our spiritual levels dictate real life. Thanks for returning for another week of Rebirth Revolution. I realize that so much of the news is depressing and dark, but try using it to hone your skills at detecting the spiritual principles that underlie everything you consume. It makes everything easier to understand. Rebirth Revolution can be found on all the podcast apps, the music apps, and full episodes play on our YouTube and Facebook pages. I just noticed that the last few episodes are not on some of the apps, so I'll try to iron that out. You can always find everything on rebirthrevolution.com. Until next week, keep your head above water. Be thankful you haven't done anything that resulted in a subpoena. Stick with your COVID precautions. And have a tall, cool one. Remember, you are loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Stay strong and safe and intact.